Welcome to Stoic Philosophy for Life. This is not just a place to listen to books, it's a space to feel them with your soul. Here, we illuminate your mind with timeless lessons. Awaken your inner strength, cultivate self-minded discipline, and guide your journey of personal growth. Every word is carefully chosen to reach what you're truly seeking: peace, clarity, and lasting transformation. If this feels like the place for you, hit subscribe and walk this path with us every single day. Now, put on your headphones, take a deep breath, and begin the journey of renewing your mind and your life. How to talk like a lead. There is a certain weight in the way true leaders speak. It is not about volume or the number of words, it is about presence. Have you noticed how some people can enter a room, say only a few sentences, and yet command everyone's attention? They do not rush. They do not scramble to impress. Instead, they speak from a place of calm authority, the kind of authority that comes not from a title, but from a disciplined mind. In this episode, we are going to explore how you can develop that presence, that ability to speak, so that others want to listen. And we will draw on the wisdom of Stoic philosophy to get there. By the time you reach the end, you will not only know how to talk like a leader, you will feel like one. The Stoics understood something that modern leadership coaches often forget: the way you speak is a reflection of the way you think. If your mind is cluttered, your words will be scattered. If your heart is restless, your tone will betray you. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." Your speech is simply that color made audible. This is why Epictetus taught his students not to focus on clever phrases or polished delivery, but on clarity of thought and control over the self. If you can master your inner state, you will naturally speak with strength and calm. Think of the greatest leaders in history. Many were not flamboyant or theatrical. They did not rely on constant humor or charm to hold attention. They chose words like a craftsman chooses tools carefully, deliberately, with purpose. Napoleon once said that a leader is a dealer in hope. Hope is not given through empty promises or exaggerated claims, but through words that are steady, measured, and rooted in conviction. When you speak as a leader, you are not just delivering information. You are shaping the emotional state of everyone who hears you. But to do this well, you must first remove the impulse to prove yourself in every conversation. The insecure person tries to dominate through noise. The confident leader dominates through silence when it is needed, and through words when they are necessary. The Stoics practiced this by asking themselves before they spoke, is this true? Is this necessary? Does it help? If the answer was no, they stayed quiet. Imagine how different your conversations would be if you applied those 3 questions before speaking. One of the most common mistakes aspiring leaders make is speaking too quickly. Rapid speech often comes from anxiety, from a fear that people will stop listening. But when you slow down, you create space, and in that space, people lean in. Seneca once compared a wise person to a deep, still body of water, calm on the surface but powerful in depth. Speaking like a leader means allowing your words to carry weight, and weight cannot exist if you rush to fill every silence. Here is a simple exercise. The next time you are in a conversation, practice pausing before you respond. Count 2 seconds in your head before speaking. This moment of stillness will feel uncomfortable at first, but it will also give you control. It signals that you are not reacting emotionally but responding intentionally. Over time, this becomes a natural habit. People will notice. They will start to value your words more because they are not thrown carelessly into the air, they are placed with precision. Now, leadership in speech is not about never showing emotion. In fact, the best leaders let their emotions be seen, but only after they have been mastered. Anger can inspire if it is disciplined. Passion can motivate if it is grounded, but an uncontrolled outburst destroys trust instantly. Epictetus warned against becoming a slave to impressions, those initial waves of emotion that push us to speak before thinking. A leader acknowledges the emotion internally, then decides what form it will take when expressed. Think also about the language you choose. Leaders speak in ways that lift others, not crush them. This does not mean avoiding hard truths, it means delivering them with respect and purpose. The Stoics believed in speaking in service of the common good, not personal vanity. Before you make a statement, ask yourself, am I speaking to build or am I speaking to show off? The first will earn loyalty, the second will breed resentment. Another hallmark of a leader's speech is that it is grounded in reality. Grand promises and dramatic declarations may impress for a moment, but they fade quickly when unbacked by action. Marcus Aurelius never pretended to know what he did not. He spoke plainly, acknowledging uncertainty when it was there. This honesty created trust, and trust is the foundation upon which leadership stands. Finally, remember that speaking like a leader is not about making every sentence perfect. It is about making every sentence intentional. People will forgive imperfect grammar or an occasional stumble if they sense your sincerity and your strength. What they will not forgive is arrogance disguised as confidence or manipulation disguised as care. A Stoic leader speaks with the aim of leaving others stronger than they were before the conversation began. So the next time you open your mouth to speak, whether to a team, a friend, or a stranger, pause. Remind yourself that your words are not just sounds, they are seeds. Plant them with care. Some will take root in the minds of others and grow into something far beyond what you will ever see. That is the quiet power of a leader's voice. If you want to speak like a leader, you must first learn to think like one. Words are simply the visible tip of a much deeper structure. Beneath them lies your mindset, your values, your ability to see the bigger picture when others get lost in the moment. The Stoics understood that a man's tongue often reveals more than he intends because it reflects the quality of his inner discipline. If your mind is calm, your words will be calm. If your mind is restless, your speech will carry that turbulence. This is why true leadership in speech begins in silence, by shaping your thoughts before they ever become sound. Consider the way Marcus Aurelius would approach an imperial council. He did not speak first, nor did he speak most. He listened. He gathered the threads of conversation, weighing them in his mind, and when he did speak, it was as if the air itself had shifted. His voice was not loud, but it carried weight, because it emerged from reflection, not reaction. In the same way, when you listen deeply before you speak, you gather the raw material for words that matter. Most people only half listen, rehearsing their own reply while the other person is still talking. Leaders listen with the intent to understand, not to prepare their counter-argument. The Stoic idea of controlling impressions, those first flashes of judgment, is a powerful tool here. Epictetus advised that when you hear something that stirs emotion, you should pause and remind yourself, this is only an impression, not the truth itself. This mental step allows you to respond with clarity rather than being driven by instinctive emotion. Imagine how different heated debates or tense negotiations would feel if you trained yourself to take this pause before replying. But there is more. A leader's speech is not just careful, it is purposeful. Every sentence should serve a direction. Napoleon's correspondence with his generals was famously concise and goal-oriented. He stripped away anything unnecessary so that his message could travel quickly and without distortion. You can practice the same by asking yourself before speaking, what is the outcome I want this conversation to achieve? If you do not know, you risk speaking just to fill the air, which weakens your authority. In moments of conflict, leaders resist the temptation to match the other person's emotional intensity. If someone raises their voice, you lower yours. If they rush you, slow down. This is not weakness. It is the deliberate control of tone to reframe the emotional climate. Seneca once compared it to steering a ship through a storm. The captain does not fight the wind, he adjusts the sails. By controlling your delivery, You guide the entire conversation toward calmer waters. Metaphors are another powerful tool for the leader's voice. Humans think in pictures, and a well-chosen image can carry a message further than a paragraph of explanations. The Stoics often spoke in such terms, comparing life to a theater, the mind to a fortress, virtue to a well-tended garden. When you speak as a leader, give people something they can see in their minds, not just hear in their ears. This makes your message memorable and gives it staying power. And yet, leadership in speech also means knowing when not to speak. Silence can be the most commanding sound in the room. A pause after a key statement allows it to sink in. A refusal to respond to provocation shows that you are not easily moved from your center. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the best revenge is not to be like the wrongdoer. In speech, this means refusing to match the pettiness or aggression of others, choosing instead to remain anchored in dignity. The tone of a leader's voice matters as much as the words themselves. The Stoics practiced speaking in a steady, even manner, free from the extremes of excessive enthusiasm or visible anger. This balance does not come from forcing a false calm. It comes from genuinely cultivating a stable mind. The more you live with a sense of inner order, the more naturally your voice will carry steadiness. People can sense authenticity. They know when calmness is real and when it is an act. Another discipline worth practicing is brevity. Brevity is not about being short. It is about being complete without excess. Leaders avoid wandering into unnecessary detail that dilutes their point. The more clearly you can express a thought in fewer words, the more impact it will have. This does not mean rushing. It means cutting away the verbal weeds so the truth can stand unobstructed. Over time, the way you speak will influence how others see you. People will begin to associate your voice with reliability, strength, and fairness. This is not a performance to be turned on and off. It must be woven into your everyday conversations. The greatest leaders do not switch into leader mode only during speeches. They carry that same presence in casual remarks, private discussions, and even in the way they greet someone. Consistency builds trust, and trust is the invisible currency that makes leadership possible. If you have listened this far, chances are you are not satisfied with speaking like everyone else. You want your words to carry influence, to inspire action, to leave a mark. So take a moment to think about the last 3 conversations you had. Did your words move the conversation toward clarity, or did they scatter it into noise? Did you listen as much as you spoke? Did you pause before responding? Only you can answer these questions honestly. And the change begins not in the next big speech you give, but in the very next sentence you speak today. If you found this message valuable, share it with someone who needs it. You never know whose life might shift because of a single conversation. And subscribe to stay connected with future lessons that will keep sharpening your leadership voice. To speak like a leader, you must cultivate the habit of speaking from principle, not from impulse. This is where Stoic philosophy becomes your most reliable guide. The Stoics taught that a man's true power lies in his ability to remain steady in the face of life's storms. Your voice is one of the clearest indicators of whether you have mastered this art. If you can remain composed when others lose control, people will instinctively turn to you for direction. Leadership is not always about giving orders. Often it is about becoming the calm center that others naturally align with. Marcus Aurelius faced daily challenges as emperor, political betrayal, military crisis, and personal loss. Yet in his writings you see a man who chose his words carefully, never allowing the weight of the world to twist his tone into bitterness. He understood that his speech was not merely a reflection of his emotions, it was a tool to shape the emotions of others. If a leader speaks with despair, the group feels despair. If he speaks with resolve, they find courage. This is why your words must be chosen not just for accuracy, but for the emotional state they will create in those who hear them. A common trap is to speak to prove you are right. The Stoics would consider this a dangerous temptation. because it turns the conversation into a contest of egos. Epictetus warned that the purpose of conversation is not victory, but mutual understanding. When you speak with the sole intent of winning, you may gain a point but lose influence. True leaders measure their success in a conversation not by whether they have defeated an opponent, but by whether they have brought clarity to the situation. One practical way to align your speech with Stoic principles is to imagine that everything you say will be recorded and judged years from now. Would you still speak the same way if your words were carved in stone? This simple mental exercise forces you to strip away careless phrases, petty complaints, and manipulative tones. It reminds you that every sentence leaves a trace, whether in someone's memory or in the ripple effect of your influence. Leaders also understand the power of framing. Two people can describe the same reality, but the one who frames it with purpose will inspire action, while the other only provokes resignation. Consider a challenging project. A reactive voice says, "This will be hard and we might fail." A leader says, "This will be challenging, and that is exactly why it matters." The facts are the same, but the framing transforms how people feel. The Stoics mastered this skill by reframing difficulties as opportunities to practice virtue, patience, courage, self-control. Your body language is another silent part of your speech. You cannot speak like a leader if your posture contradicts your words. The Stoics carried themselves with quiet dignity, neither shrinking nor posturing. If your tone says confidence but your body says insecurity, people will believe the body. Aligning your physical presence with your verbal message creates a coherence that others instinctively trust. This means standing tall without stiffness, meeting eyes without aggression, and letting your gestures be deliberate rather than restless. There is also a discipline in repetition. Leaders often return to the same key principles over and over, not because they lack imagination, but because they understand that influence comes from consistent reinforcement. Marcus Aurelius returned again and again to the reminder that we cannot control external events, only our response. When you anchor your speech to a few core principles and repeat them across contexts, people begin to see you as a steady reference point rather than a shifting voice. And yet speaking like a leader is not about being unyielding in every moment. Flexibility is just as important as firmness. The Stoics were not rigid. They adapted their expression to suit the situation while keeping their values constant. You may speak with gentle encouragement in one moment and with sharp clarity in another. The key is that both are anchored in the same underlying purpose to guide others toward truth and strength. Another thing the Stoics teach us is to avoid unnecessary exaggeration. When a leader exaggerates, he trades long-term trust for short-term effect. People may be stirred in the moment, but once they discover the overstatement, the credibility is gone. This is why the Stoics practiced a form of verbal temperance, speaking in ways that neither inflated nor diminished reality but presented it in its true proportion. This restraint allows your words to be relied upon in both calm and crisis. Finally, never underestimate the influence of your listening face. People watch you even when you are silent, and they will decide whether to trust your words based on how you receive theirs. A leader listens with full attention without the restless glances or impatient sighs that betray disinterest. Seneca wrote that to listen well is as much a gift as to speak well. When people feel truly heard by you, they will hear you more deeply in return. Leadership in speech is an ongoing discipline. It is not learned in a single day or a single book. It is forged in the small moments: how you answer a question, how you close a meeting, how you respond to a challenge. The Stoics remind us that each of these moments is a chance to practice the art of speaking with wisdom, calm, and purpose. Do this often enough, and your voice will carry the quiet authority that marks a true leader. The journey to speaking like a leader begins with an inner transformation. You cannot consistently speak with strength, clarity, and wisdom
if your inner life is filled with chaos. People often think that leadership in speech is about learning techniques, how to modulate your tone, how to use pauses, how to deliver persuasive arguments. Those matter, but they are the surface. The deeper foundation lies in the kind of person you are when no one is watching. The Stoics understood this well. Epictetus reminded his students that it is not enough to say wise things, you must live them. Words become hollow when they are not backed by the weight of consistent action. If you want your speech to inspire trust, you must become trustworthy. Leaders speak from a place of values. That is why their words resonate. When Marcus Aurelius addressed his soldiers during campaigns, his authority did not come from the crown on his head, but from the life he had lived among them. He endured the same hardships, shared the same cold, faced the same dangers. His words carried weight because they were anchored in lived experience. When you speak to people, they subconsciously measure whether your life aligns with your message. If it does, they listen. If it does not, they may hear you, but they will not follow you. The Stoics also teach that the quality of your speech depends on the clarity of your mind. If your mind is clouded with resentment, fear, or ego, your words will leak that poison no matter how polished they sound. That is why they train daily to master their thoughts. Marcus Aurelius began each morning reminding himself that he would meet people who are ignorant, selfish, or deceitful, and that none of this should surprise him or provoke him. By preparing his mind in advance, he could speak without the bitterness that often infects leadership communication. You can practice the same. Before important conversations, take a moment to remind yourself of your purpose and your principles. Let your intention guide your tone before the first word leaves your mouth. One of the most powerful tools a leader can use is deliberate pacing. Average people rush their words, filling every second with sound, as if silence were an enemy. Leaders understand that silence is an ally. When you pause, you signal that your words are worth waiting for. That pause also gives you a moment to shape your next sentence, ensuring it carries the weight of thought rather than the debris of impulse. Napoleon was famous for reading correspondence twice before responding, even when urgency pressed. His discipline allowed him to reply with clarity that moved armies. In conversation, the same principle applies. Resist the reflex to answer instantly. Give space for thought. Those who can wait before speaking often control the pace of the discussion. Speaking like a leader also means learning to remove the unnecessary. Seneca wrote that it is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it. The same is true of speech. Most conversations are bloated with unnecessary repetition, filler words, and empty phrases. A leader trims away these excesses until only the essential remains. This does not mean you speak less warmly or less humanly. It means that when you speak, every word has a purpose. People begin to realize that when you open your mouth, it is for a reason, and this alone will make them pay attention. Another core Stoic principle in leadership speech is emotional regulation. Leaders do not deny emotion, they discipline it. There is a difference between passion and volatility. Passion can lift a room. Volatility can burn it down. Marcus Aurelius, even under provocation, rarely let his tone slip into contempt. He knew that losing emotional control in speech often causes greater damage than the situation that provoked it. You must learn to recognize the rise of emotion and decide how it will be expressed. Sometimes this means softening it. Other times, it means sharpening it into a deliberate strike, but it should never burst out uncontrolled. Imagery and metaphor are timeless tools for leaders. The human brain holds on to stories more than abstract statements. The Stoics often used nature as a metaphor for human behavior. They spoke of trees that grow stronger in the wind, of rivers that flow around obstacles, of fortresses that stand unmoved by siege. When you speak to people, give them mental images that can guide them long after your words have faded. A single image can become a touchstone for someone's decisions for years. Equally important is the ability to adapt your communication to your audience without losing your principles. A leader does not speak to a group of soldiers in the same way he speaks to a council of scholars. The tone, examples, and emphasis shift, but the core values remain constant. This adaptability shows both intelligence and respect. The Stoics understood that virtue remains the same, but its expression changes with circumstance. When you adapt without compromising, you show that you are grounded yet flexible, a rare and valuable combination. There is also a discipline in not over-explaining. Many insecure speakers feel the need to defend every word to prove their knowledge in every sentence. But over-explanation can drain authority. Leaders understand that sometimes a clear, simple statement carries more weight than a long justification. This is because they trust the strength of their own credibility. When you have lived in alignment with your values, your track record will do much of the explaining for you. Another subtle yet powerful element is the way leaders acknowledge others in their speech. When a leader publicly credits the contributions of others, he strengthens loyalty and morale. The Stoics saw leadership as service, not self-display. Marcus Aurelius often spoke in terms of we rather than I when addressing his legions, making them feel part of a shared purpose. This choice of pronouns is not cosmetic, it is strategic. It builds unity and signals that the leader's ego is not the main engine of the mission. And let us not forget that leadership in speech is also about the questions you ask. A well-placed question can unlock insight in others far more effectively than a lecture. Socrates, though not a Stoic, embodied this principle. By asking guiding questions, he led people to discover truths for themselves, which they then owned more deeply. Leaders who master the art of questioning create not just followers, but thinkers. This is the kind of influence that lasts beyond your presence. At the heart of it all, speaking like a leader means understanding that your words are not about you, they are about the effect you have on others. Every time you speak, you have a choice to strengthen or to weaken, to clarify or to confuse, to inspire or to discourage. The Stoics remind us that we are always responsible for the use of our reason, and speech is reason made visible. You are shaping the moral and emotional climate around you with every conversation. This is a power worth treating with reverence. If you have stayed with me to this point, it means you are serious about transforming not just your speech, but yourself. Take a moment right now to think about the last 3 people you spoke to today. Did you leave them more focused, more encouraged, or more confused than before? The answer will tell you more about your leadership than any title or position ever could. If these lessons have been valuable, share them. You never know when a single insight could change the course of someone's life. And remember to subscribe so that these teachings become a steady companion on your path to mastery. To speak like a leader is not to perform, it is to reveal the disciplined order of your mind through the structure of your words. This is why the Stoics place such emphasis on daily reflection. They knew that the quality of your speech in public is shaped by the quality of your thoughts in private. A leader who wakes up each day without mental preparation is like a general walking into battle without a plan. Your voice will betray your inner disarray. But a leader who begins the day by clarifying his principles, reminding himself of his purpose and preparing for the challenges ahead, carries that inner stability into every conversation. Marcus Aurelius had the weight of an empire on his shoulders, yet he began each morning not with orders to his generals, but with words to himself. He reminded himself of human nature, of the inevitability of trouble, and of the need to remain just patient and calm. This private discipline shaped his public voice. He did not need to shout to be heard. His authority came from the alignment between his inner convictions and his outward words. That alignment is what creates the kind of presence that makes others fall silent when you begin to speak. A leader's speech must be rooted in reality. There is a temptation, especially in times of uncertainty, to promise more than you can deliver, to soothe people with illusions rather than truth. But the Stoics would call this a betrayal of reason. Seneca wrote that it is better to endure the truth than to be comforted by falsehood. Leaders who speak truthfully, even when the truth is difficult, earn respect that outlasts the moment. It is not the leader who says what is easy that is remembered, but the one who says what is necessary. The challenge, however, is in how you deliver hard truths. Truth without care can be cruelty. Care without truth can be deception. A Stoic leader aims for both honesty wrapped in respect. You can tell someone their performance is failing without stripping them of dignity. You can acknowledge a crisis without fueling panic. Your tone, your pacing, your choice of words. These are the tools you use to shape the emotional impact of the truth. One powerful technique is to pair realism with direction. It is one thing to say, "We are in a difficult situation." It is another to follow it with, "And here is what we can do about it." The first statement informs, the second statement leads. People need both. Marcus Aurelius faced plagues, wars, and political unrest, yet his words always carried a thread of direction. He did not dwell on despair. He pointed toward action. This balance between acknowledging reality and inspiring forward movement is what sets a leader apart from a commentator. The Stoics also warn against the danger of speaking from wounded pride. In moments of conflict, it is tempting to speak in order to defend your ego rather than to advance the truth. But leaders who fall into this trap weaken their credibility. Epictetus advised that when you are insulted, remember that it is only an opinion, not a fact, and that your response will reveal more about you than about the insult itself. When you let your ego dictate your words, you turn the conversation into a personal duel, and leadership becomes impossible. When you let principle guide your words, you turn the conversation into a search for truth, and leadership becomes inevitable. Leadership in speech is also about vision. People look to leaders for a sense of where they are going, not just for instructions on what to do. Vision is communicated not through vague slogans, but through vivid language that helps people see the future you are working toward. Napoleon inspired his troops not by promising ease, but by painting a picture of the glory and honor they would earn through struggle. Your words should help others imagine the result, feel it in their bones, and want to move toward it. But vision must be grounded. Lofty promises with no practical steps lead to cynicism. The Stoics were practical philosophers. They tied every principle to action. If you speak of a better future, you must also speak of the daily disciplines that will get you there. This is where many leaders fail. They inspire in the moment but offer no path forward, leaving people with excitement that quickly fades into frustration. The leader's role is to turn inspiration into structure, hope into habit. There is also a humility in true leadership speech. You must be willing to admit what you do not know. In an age where many pretend to have all the answers, the leader who says, "I do not know yet, but I will find out," stands out for honesty. Marcus Aurelius often admitted in his writings when he was uncertain or still seeking understanding. This did not make him weaker in the eyes of his followers. It made him more human and therefore more relatable. People respect certainty when it is real, but they respect honesty even more. A leader's speech should be inclusive, not in the shallow, performative sense, but in the way you make people feel that they are part of something larger than themselves. The Stoics saw all humans as part of a greater whole bound by shared reason and moral responsibility. When you speak from this perspective, you naturally choose words that unite rather than divide. Even when addressing disagreement, you speak to the shared values beneath the differences. This creates an atmosphere where people can engage without hostility. We must also address the rhythm of a leader's speech. Great orators understand that speech is music as much as it is language. The rise and fall of your tone, the deliberate use of emphasis, the pauses that give weight to your words. These are the elements that make people lean in. But unlike theatrical performers, Leaders use rhythm not to entertain, but to ingrain the message in memory. A well-timed pause before a key point or a subtle drop in tone to signal seriousness can turn a sentence into something unforgettable. Above all, speaking like a leader is about responsibility. Your words are not yours alone, they belong to everyone they touch. Once spoken, they move beyond your control. They can heal or harm, build or destroy, inspire or paralyze. The Stoics knew this, which is why they treated speech as a moral act. They would say that each word you speak should be worthy of your character. When you begin to see your speech this way, you will find yourself speaking less often, but with far greater impact. If you have listened closely to this point, you are already ahead of most. You are not looking for tricks to sound impressive. You are seeking the deeper discipline that makes speech a reflection of wisdom. So here is your challenge for the next 3 days. Speak as if every word you say will be quoted by someone you respect. Speak with intention. Speak with clarity. Speak with the calm strength of someone who knows where they stand. Then watch how the world begins to listen differently. If these words have given you something to reflect on, pass them forward. The lessons of leadership grow stronger when they are shared. And remember to subscribe so that you can continue sharpening your voice until it becomes the kind of voice people will remember for the right reasons. To speak like a leader, you must understand that words are instruments of influence, not ornaments for display. The Stoics approach speech as a tool of service, a means of guiding others toward what is just, rational, and necessary. They did not aim to sound impressive for its own sake, but to make their words useful, precise, and unshakable. In our time, this principle is more critical than ever. We live in an age of constant noise, where endless streams of words pour from screens and mouths without pause. Most are forgotten as soon as they are heard. But the words of a true leader do not vanish, they take root. The first way to achieve this is through what the Stoics called intentionality. Every sentence should have a reason for being spoken. Empty speech drains authority the way leaking water drains a vessel. Imagine you are holding a bow. Each word is an arrow, and every arrow you fire should be aimed at something worth hitting. This is why the greatest leaders are often the most economical with their speech. They speak less frequently, but when they do, people listen because they know those words are not wasted. Marcus Aurelius once reflected that one should let your speech be the common good. This is a radical shift in perspective. It means you do not speak to win applause, to display cleverness, or to gratify your ego. You speak because you believe what you are saying will make the listener or the situation better. In practice, this requires you to strip away the subtle layers of vanity that so often infect conversation. You must ask yourself before you speak, is this for me or is it for them? The answer will determine the strength of your leadership voice. Another hallmark of a leader's speech is composure under fire. Many can speak well in calm conditions. Few can do so when pressure mounts. The Stoics trained for this by practicing what we might call verbal readiness. They anticipated criticism, provocation, and misunderstanding, and prepared themselves not to be shaken by them. Epictetus reminded his students that they cannot control what others say, only how they choose to respond. When you maintain calm while others lose theirs, you gain the silent respect of everyone present, even those who disagree with you. Silence, too, is part of a leader's vocabulary. Strategic silence can say more than a flood of words. A pause before answering signals thoughtfulness. A refusal to rise to an insult shows strength. Napoleon was known for long moments of stillness before speaking in negotiations, a tactic that unsettled opponents and conveyed that he was weighing every word. In a world obsessed with instant replies, the leader who waits is the one who holds the room. Storytelling remains one of the most potent tools of leadership speech. The Stoics understood the human mind remembers truths better when they are wrapped in narratives. Seneca's letters to Lucilius are filled with small, vivid stories about a storm at sea, a gladiator's courage, a philosopher's quiet death, that embed moral lessons in the imagination. When you speak to inspire action, give your audience an image they can carry away. Facts may be forgotten, but stories stay. A leader's voice should also be adaptable without losing its integrity. There is a difference between adjusting your language for your audience and bending your values to please them. Marcus Aurelius could address senators in the measured language of politics and soldiers in the plain words of the camp, yet his principles remained unchanged. This adaptability shows respect for the listener and mastery of your own message. If you can make your point clear to a child, a scholar, and a warrior alike, you have truly learned to speak as a leader. One danger for leaders is over-promising. The temptation to inspire through exaggeration is strong, but it is a short-term gain that costs long-term trust. The Stoics despised exaggeration because it distorts reality, and reality is the ground upon which reason stands. A leader who consistently paints a picture brighter than truth will eventually be seen as a manipulator. It is better to understate and deliver more than expected than to promise the impossible and fail. We must also consider the leader's duty to protect the dignity of others, even in disagreement. You can dismantle an argument without demeaning the person who holds it. You can point out error without attacking identity. This restraint does not weaken your message. It strengthens it by showing that you are guided by reason, not hostility. The Stoics would say that such control is evidence of self-mastery, and self-mastery is the foundation of all leadership. The final layer is authenticity. You cannot fake the depth that true leadership speech requires. People can sense when words are hollow, when they are spoken for effect rather than from conviction. Authenticity comes from living the principles you speak about, from aligning your private conduct with your public message. When those two match, your voice carries an unshakable credibility. Even those who oppose you will find it hard to dismiss you. If you have listened to this point, it is likely because you want to rise above the noise and speak in a way that truly matters. So here is your reflection. Think about the last 3 decisions you made that required you to speak with influence. Did you use your words to clarify or to complicate, to serve your own image or to serve the good of others? And most importantly, if every word you spoke yesterday were carved in stone, would you be proud to stand beside them? Only you can answer this honestly. But know this, your future as a leader begins not with the next speech you give, but with the next sentence you choose today. If you found these ideas valuable, share them with someone who needs them. You never know whose path might shift because of a single conversation. And remember to subscribe so that this journey toward mastery continues together. The voice of a leader is not built in the spotlight. It is forged in the quiet moments when no one is listening, when you are speaking to yourself in thought, when you are choosing how to respond to small irritations, when you are deciding whether to speak at all. The Stoics understood that leadership is a habit, not a performance. If your private words are reckless, your public words will eventually betray the same carelessness. But if you have disciplined your inner dialogue, if you have trained yourself to think in clear and ordered ways, then when the moment comes to speak before others, the strength in your voice will already be there. Consider the image of a seasoned captain steering a ship through a storm. His crew watches not for the size of his gestures, but for the steadiness of his hand. In the same way, people judge a leader's speech not by its volume, but by its composure. When you speak in crisis, your tone becomes the emotional anchor for everyone listening. A shaky voice spreads uncertainty. A steady voice spreads courage. The Stoics trained for this steadiness by practicing what they called premeditation of adversity, imagining difficulties before they arrived so that they would not be surprised or unprepared when they came. You can do the same. Before walking into a high-stakes conversation, ask yourself, what challenges might I face in this discussion? How will I respond without losing my center? Leadership speech also requires moral clarity. You must know your principles so well that no provocation can push you to abandon them. Marcus Aurelius often wrote about the danger of being drawn into the vices of others. If someone is arrogant, it is tempting to match their arrogance. If someone is rude, it is tempting to meet rudeness with sharpness. But in doing so, you surrender control. The leader holds fast to dignity, regardless of the tone others choose. This is not weakness. It is power over the one thing you can truly control yourself. One of the most underappreciated skills of a leader is the ability to simplify the complex without distorting it. In times of uncertainty, people crave clarity. The Stoics were masters of reduction, taking vast, tangled situations and distilling them into their essential truths. This is what Marcus Aurelius did when he reminded himself that life is short and that our only real task is to act with justice, self-control, and reason. You can practice this by asking, if I had to explain this challenge in one sentence to someone outside the situation, what would I say? That exercise forces you to find the essence, and when you communicate the essence, you lead. Metaphors can help carry this essence across. Think of Winston Churchill, who rallied Britain in its darkest hours, not by drowning people in military strategy, but by giving them mental images, the island nation standing alone, the lights going out across Europe. The Stoics did this too, though often with more personal metaphors. The mind as a fortress virtue, as armor life as a play, where you do not choose your role but must perform it well. When you speak as a leader, give people images they can hold on to when the details fade. You must also be aware of the invisible weight your words carry. A casual comment from a leader can shape morale for weeks. A careless joke can erode trust. The Stoics would remind you that once released words cannot be recalled. This is why they counseled restraint, not the restraint of fear, but the restraint of responsibility. A leader must see each word as a tool. It can build or destroy, repair or damage open doors, or close them forever. There is a discipline in letting your actions and words reinforce each other. Leaders lose credibility when they say one thing and do another. But when your actions echo your words, your speech gains a power that cannot be faked. Marcus Aurelius could speak of endurance because he endured. He could speak of justice because he ruled with it. This is why the Stoics considered personal integrity the bedrock of influence. Without it, even the most eloquent speech is nothing more than air. Another analogy: think of your words as seeds. You cannot force them to grow in others, but you can plant them carefully in the right soil. Some seeds sprout quickly, a piece of advice taken immediately to heart. Others may lie dormant for years before taking root. The leader's role is not to demand instant results, but to speak in a way that makes growth possible. This requires patience, a long-term perspective, and a faith that truth will bear fruit in its own time. Listening is also part of speaking like a leader. It may sound paradoxical, but the ability to listen deeply shapes the quality of your speech. When you truly listen, you gather the emotional and factual material you need to respond with precision. The Stoics prized understanding over victory in dialogue. They listened not to prepare their rebuttal, but to comprehend the other person's position fully. This habit not only refines your words, but also strengthens your relationships, making your speech more influential over time. Finally, there is courage. Sometimes speaking like a leader means saying what no one else will say, knowing it may cost you comfort or approval. The Stoics were not afraid to be disliked for the sake of truth. They measured their words against their values, not against the reaction they might receive. In your own life, this courage might mean addressing a hard truth in your team, standing up for someone who is not in the room, or admitting an unpopular reality that must be faced. Such moments define your voice more than any rehearsed speech ever will. Your task now is to carry these principles into your next conversation, no matter how small. Speak with composure, with clarity, with moral steadiness. Let your voice be the anchor, not the storm. And remember, the world is always listening, even when you think it is not. A true leader understands that every conversation is a stage, and every word is a performance of character. Not in the sense of pretending, but in the sense that you are always showing others who you are through how you speak. The Stoics taught that virtue is not hidden. It is expressed in action, in tone, in choice of words. You can claim to value justice, but if you speak with contempt or mockery, your audience will believe the contempt, not the claim. Speech is the mirror in which your inner life is reflected, and like any mirror, it shows the truth, whether you want it to or not. Think of the difference between a seasoned general and an inexperienced officer giving orders in battle. The general does not need to shout to be obeyed. His words carry weight because his troops have seen him act with courage and discipline before. The officer, unsure of himself, may raise his voice, repeat his commands, or overcomplicate his speech to hide insecurity. Leadership speech is not measured by how loud or long you talk, but by the silent authority that your history of actions has already built. One of the most powerful techniques the Stoics used for impactful speech was brevity. Seneca often reminded his readers that truth is simple and that unnecessary words can blur its shape. When you speak with fewer, clearer words, you leave less room for confusion and more space for the message to settle in the listener's mind. Imagine a stone dropped into still water. The fewer ripples, the clearer the reflection. In a meeting, in a family discussion, in a public address, clarity is rarely the result of adding more words. It is almost always the result of removing them. There is also a rhythm to leadership speech, much like the rhythm of a craftsman's work. A master woodworker does not rush the strokes of his chisel. He applies pressure, pauses, and lets the form take shape naturally. A skilled leader knows when to speak with intensity and when to let silence do the work. Silence used well can give more power to the words that follow than any amount of shouting. It signals control, it forces attention, it creates space for reflection. The Stoics, in their own way, were masters of silence, choosing to speak only when their words served purpose. But purpose cannot be served without empathy. The Stoics were often seen as cold or detached by those who misunderstood them, but in truth they valued human connection deeply. They simply believed that emotions should serve reason, not dominate it. In speaking like a leader, empathy allows you to reach the hearts of your listeners, while reason ensures you guide them toward the truth. It is the combination of both that makes speech transformative rather than manipulative. We can see this balance in the life of Cato the Younger, a Stoic senator in Rome. Cato was known for his incorruptibility and fierce defense of the Republic's values. When he spoke in the Senate, he did not flatter or bend his words to please the powerful, yet he also understood the human fears and desires that drove his audience. He spoke to those fears but never pandered to them. This ability to understand without surrendering principle is the mark of a leader whose speech will be remembered. Another vital element is consistency. If your message changes wildly depending on the audience, people will not trust your voice. They will suspect that you are driven by approval rather than truth. Marcus Aurelius faced this challenge constantly as emperor. He had to speak to soldiers hardened by war, senators accustomed to politics, and citizens struggling with daily survival. His tone might adapt to the audience, but the core message, virtue, discipline, service, remained unshaken. Consistency builds trust. Inconsistency erodes it faster than any single mistake. A leader's words should also act as a compass. People will come to you in moments of confusion asking for direction. They do not expect you to have every answer, but they expect you to help them find their bearings. This means your speech must be rooted in principles that endure when the situation changes. A compass points north whether the weather is fair or stormy. In the same way, your words should point toward truth and action, even when uncertainty surrounds you. The Stoics also remind us that our speech is not only for others, it is also for ourselves. Every time you speak, you reinforce the ideas you carry. If your words are bitter, you feed bitterness in yourself. If your words are hopeful and disciplined, you strengthen those qualities within. Epictetus told his students to speak as if they were always teaching themselves. That way, every conversation becomes both an act of leadership and an act of self-formation. And finally, there is the courage to speak last. In heated discussions, the rush to speak first often comes from insecurity, from a desire to control the narrative. But a leader who waits, who listens, who lets others reveal themselves before speaking, gains an advantage. By the time you speak, you can address not only the facts, but the hidden currents beneath them. You can speak to the real issue, not just the surface noise. This patience signals strength, and people can feel it. If you have listened this far, chances are you are not looking for tips to sound impressive. You are looking for ways to become the kind of person whose words naturally carry influence. That journey is not about learning clever phrases. It is about aligning your speech with your values so deeply that people hear your character in every sentence. So I will ask you, in your last 3 important conversations, did your words bring clarity or confusion? Did they guide or merely fill the air? Answer that honestly, because no one else can. If you found this message worth hearing, share it with someone who needs to find their own voice of leadership. And remember to subscribe to the channel so you never miss these conversations. The next leader someone is waiting for might be you. The most persuasive voices in history have not always been the loudest, but they have always been the clearest. Clarity combined with integrity is the foundation of a leader's speech. The modern world is noisy. Messages fly across screens, headlines scream for attention, and conversations are often reduced to sound bites. In this chaos, the leader who speaks with calm precision becomes a lighthouse in a storm. The Stoics understood this long before social media existed. They knew that truth has its own gravity, and it will draw people in if it is spoken without vanity or fear. Consider how this plays out in business leadership today. A CEO facing a sudden crisis, such as a product failure or public scandal, has a choice. She can release a flood of defensive statements blaming others, or she can stand before her employees and customers, admit the truth without excuses, and outline a clear plan for repair. The second approach requires courage, but it wins trust. The first might protect her in the short term, but will erode credibility over time. Seneca would have said that fortune tests us not in comfort, but in difficulty. It is in the heat of crisis that the quality of a leader's speech is revealed. In politics, the same principle applies. The most respected statesmen are those who speak to unify rather than divide. They understand that their words can heal or inflame. Abraham Lincoln, though not a Stoic in name, embodied many Stoic principles in his speeches. In the midst of civil war, he did not speak to punish his enemies, but to appeal to their shared humanity. His second inaugural address, calling for malice toward none, charity for all, stands as an example of how a leader can speak firmly, yet without hatred. A Stoic would recognize in this the mastery of passion, feeling deeply, yet not allowing emotion to control reason. Even in personal life, leadership speech matters. You may not be running a company or a country, but you lead in your family, your friendships, your community. When your child makes a mistake, do you speak to shame them or to guide them? When a friend is struggling, do you speak in empty platitudes, or do you offer real perspective that they can act upon? Leadership is not confined to titles. It is a daily practice. Epictetus taught that each of us is an actor on the stage of life, playing our role with dignity. Speaking as a leader means honoring that role in every setting, no matter how small. One modern executive I once observed had a remarkable habit. In meetings, when discussions became tense, he would lower his voice rather than raise it. The effect was immediate. People leaned in to hear him. By choosing calmness in heated moments, he silently communicated that panic was not necessary. This is a Stoic tactic in action, Control yourself first, and your control will influence others without force. Leaders who cannot control their tone will never control the room, but words alone are not enough. They must be backed by consistency of action. Imagine a leader who preaches transparency but hides important information, or one who praises teamwork but secretly rewards selfish behavior. People listen with their ears but believe with their eyes. The Stoics insisted that philosophy must be lived, not just spoken. Marcus Aurelius wrote daily reminders to himself not to let his words drift from his actions. His journal was not for public display, it was a private tool to keep him honest. In the same way, modern leaders must align speech and behavior if they want lasting influence. Another quality that elevates leadership speech is the ability to translate complexity into simplicity. In technology companies, for example, engineers may speak in highly technical language. A skilled leader can take those ideas and explain them in plain terms without losing their meaning. This is not about dumbing down, but about making the message accessible. As Einstein said, if you cannot explain it simply, you do not understand it well enough. The Stoics would agree true wisdom clarifies, it does not obscure. The discipline of preparation is equally important. Many people believe that great leaders speak naturally without rehearsal. The truth is that they prepare relentlessly. Marcus Aurelius did not walk into public debates unready. He spent hours in study and reflection so that his words would be anchored in knowledge and principle. In our time, leaders who invest in preparation show respect for their audience. When you prepare, you are not just shaping your message, you are shaping the trust that others place in you. And yet, even with preparation, a leader must be ready to adapt. Circumstances change, audiences shift, and unexpected challenges arise. The Stoics trained for this through mental rehearsal, imagining adversity before it arrived so they would not be caught off guard. A leader speaking to a team after an unexpected setback must be able to adjust their message without losing the core principle. This flexibility signals competence and composure. It tells people we will navigate this together. If you have listened to this point, you are probably not just interested in how to sound like a leader, you want to become one in truth. This requires more than occasional moments of eloquence. It demands a lifelong commitment to speaking with clarity, purpose, and integrity, whether to a stadium full of listeners or to one person in a quiet room. So I will challenge you. In the coming week, choose one important conversation and prepare for it as if it could shape the future, because it might. Speak as if every word were a seed and ask yourself, what kind of harvest do you want to grow if this message has stirred something in you? Share it with someone who is ready to step into their own leadership voice. And remember to subscribe so we can keep walking this path together. There is a quiet strength in a leader who speaks less but says more. In a culture where speed is often valued over substance, the art of measured speech can feel almost revolutionary. People rush to fill silences with words, afraid that a pause might be mistaken for ignorance. But a leader who understands the power of stillness knows that silence can be as persuasive as speech. The Stoics often paused before responding, not to appear wise, but to ensure that what they said would serve truth rather than impulse. In those few seconds of stillness, they gained control over themselves, and in doing so, they gained influence over others. One of the simplest ways to bring Stoic philosophy into your speech is to delay your response by a heartbeat. When someone challenges you or provokes you, resist the urge to fire back immediately. Instead, take a single breath. That breath is the difference between reacting and responding. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily that he could not control what others said or did, but he could always control the judgment he placed on it. In the heat of conversation, that principle is a shield. It protects you from being pulled into someone else's chaos. Imagine you are leading a meeting and a colleague publicly criticizes your idea. Your first instinct might be to defend yourself sharply, but if you pause, acknowledge their point, and ask a thoughtful question, You shift the dynamic entirely. You turn what could have been a conflict into a collaboration. You show that you are not threatened by disagreement, that you are strong enough to welcome it. This is how leaders turn opponents into allies. And it starts not with words, but with the discipline to hold them back until they are shaped by reason. Another cornerstone of Stoic speech is intentional framing. How you choose to present an idea often determines how it will be received. Consider two leaders delivering the same message. One says, "We have a problem," and the other says, "We have an opportunity to solve something important." The facts are identical, but the impact is worlds apart. A Stoic leader frames challenges in a way that calls forth action rather than despair. This does not mean avoiding the truth. It means presenting the truth in a way that inspires courage. The language of a leader should also be inclusive. A Stoic understands that leadership is not about elevating oneself above others, but about walking alongside them. When you say "we" instead of "I," you send a signal that you are part of the team, that you share both the burden and the credit. Even Marcus Aurelius, emperor of Rome, often wrote as if he were speaking to himself and his people together, using "we" when reflecting on the duties of life. He did not place himself on a pedestal. He placed himself in the same struggle as every other human being. Clarity is the companion of integrity. If your words are vague or overly complex, people may nod politely, but leave without understanding, or worse, with a misunderstanding. Leaders who speak clearly honor the time and attention of their listeners. In modern communication, clarity often means resisting the urge to impress with jargon. It means speaking in the simplest language that still conveys the full depth of your idea. A Stoic leader knows that wisdom is not proved by complicated speech, but by the ability to make the complex understandable. There is also the matter of emotional tone. Some leaders believe that passion means volume, that raising their voice will raise their influence. But true passion is felt in conviction, not in decibels. A soft-spoken leader with unwavering confidence can command more attention than a shouting leader full of doubt. The Stoics valued emotional equilibrium. They did not allow highs or lows to dictate their message. In this way, their words were like well-built ships, steady in rough waters, carrying their passengers safely to shore. You can practice this by imagining that every important conversation you have is being recorded and played back to someone you deeply respect. Would you want them to hear frustration in your voice? Would you want them to hear rushed, scattered words? Or would you want them to hear clarity, composure, and purpose? This mental rehearsal forces you to bring intention to your tone, not just your vocabulary. But speaking like a leader is not only about discipline, it is about service. The Stoics believed that the purpose of speech was to improve the soul, either your own or that of the listener. Ask yourself before speaking, will my words leave this person better than I found them? Will they strengthen, enlighten, or comfort? If the answer is no, perhaps the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. Silence, when chosen wisely, is not absence, it is presence in its purest form. The transformation from ordinary communication to Stoic leadership speech does not happen overnight. It is built in the small daily choices to pause before replying, to frame with purpose, to choose clarity over complexity, and to speak in service rather than self-interest. Every conversation is a training ground. Every challenge to your patience is a test of your composure, and every word you speak is a reflection of the leader you are becoming. If you have listened to this far, chances are you are not satisfied with simply sounding like a leader. You want to embody it. Take a moment to recall the last conversation you had that mattered. How did you show up in that moment? Did your words reflect your highest values, or did they reflect your most immediate emotions? Share your answer in the comments below. Someone else may need the reminder that leadership is forged in the smallest moments, not just the grand ones. If you have found value in this message, pass it on. You never know whose life might shift because of a single conversation, and subscribe to stay connected to these lessons because mastery comes from steady practice. The true test of a leader's voice is not in moments of agreement, but in moments of resistance. It is easy to speak with confidence when the room nods along, but real leadership emerges when you face doubt, opposition, or even hostility. In such moments, many people resort to either aggression or retreat, fighting to overpower their opponent, or withdrawing to avoid discomfort. A Stoic leader chooses neither. Instead, they stand firmly in their values, listen fully to the other side, and speak with a calm authority that cannot be provoked. This is not weakness. It is the highest form of strength. When Epictetus taught his students, he warned them never to confuse persuasion with manipulation. Persuasion rooted in truth seeks to enlighten the listener, while manipulation seeks to exploit them. The Stoic leader wins trust by making it clear that their intention is not to win the argument at any cost, but to reach a shared understanding of reality. This subtle shift changes the dynamic entirely. When people sense that you are committed to truth rather than personal victory, their defenses begin to lower. They may still disagree with you, but they are more likely to respect you, and in time, respect often leads to alignment. One of the most effective tools of persuasion is empathy, not as a tactic to charm, but as a genuine willingness to understand the perspective of the other person. In heated discussions, people rarely listen because they feel unheard. A Stoic leader reverses this pattern by giving the other person the gift of feeling fully understood before offering their own view. This does not mean agreement. It means acknowledgement. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself to see the world as others see it, to walk through their reasoning before deciding how to respond. This kind of listening has a disarming effect. It removes the need for the other person to defend themselves, opening space for true dialogue. Another advanced Stoic technique is to anchor your message in timeless principles rather than personal preferences. If you argue based on what I want or what I like, you give the other person reason to reject it as subjective. But if you frame your point around principles like fairness, honor, or the greater good, you appeal to values that most people already hold. Even if they do not agree with your conclusion, they will find it harder to dismiss your reasoning outright. Seneca often framed his counsel in universal human truths, making it difficult for others to reject the core message, even if they disagreed with the application. There is also the matter of pacing your words. In moments of tension, the natural impulse is to speak faster, to try to outpace opposition. But rapid speech can signal insecurity and give the impression that you are trying to rush past scrutiny. A Stoic leader intentionally slows down. They let their words breathe. They pause to allow the weight of an idea to settle in the listener's mind. This measured pace communicates confidence and forces the conversation to move on your terms, not the terms set by tension or urgency. Storytelling remains one of the most powerful persuasion tools in a leader's arsenal. Facts appeal to logic, but stories speak to the heart. The Stoics themselves often taught in parables and metaphors because they understood that the human mind is wired for narrative. If you want someone to truly understand a principle, wrap it in a story they can see, feel, and remember. For example, instead of merely instructing your team to stay calm in uncertainty, you might tell the story of a ship captain who navigated a storm by trusting the stars rather than the waves. The story becomes a mental anchor, something they can recall long after the meeting has ended. Above all, a Stoic leader resists the temptation to match the emotional energy of the room. If the other person becomes loud, you do not need to raise your voice. If they become agitated, you do not need to mirror their agitation. Instead, you hold your ground in calmness, creating a stable emotional center that others instinctively gravitate toward. This is how influence works, not by overpowering, but by out-centering the chaos around you. And perhaps the most counterintuitive lesson of all a Stoic leader who is willing to walk away without forcing agreement. Influence is not about winning every battle, but about planting seeds that may grow later. Some people will resist you simply because they are not ready to hear what you have to say. If you try to force them, you will harden their resistance. But if you leave them with a thought that lingers, something that challenges their worldview quietly, there is a chance they will come back to it when the time is right. In this way, your words live beyond the moment of speaking. If you have come this far, you already understand that leadership is not about controlling others. It is about mastering yourself so fully that your words carry the weight of that mastery. Think about your last disagreement. Did you truly listen, or were you simply waiting for your turn to speak? Did you anchor your message in shared values, or did you argue from personal preference? Reflect honestly and then share your insights below. Someone reading your words may find the courage to approach their next conversation differently. If you found this valuable, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that leadership is a discipline of the mind before it is a command of the tongue. And subscribe so that you do not miss the final chapter of this journey into Stoic leadership. There comes a point in every leader's journey when words are no longer just sounds in the air. They become the imprint you leave on the people around you. You have learned that speaking like a leader is not about volume, nor is it about commanding attention through force. It is about speaking from a place so steady, so rooted in principle, that every word carries the quiet gravity of truth. When a Stoic leader speaks, they do not try to impress. They aim to awaken. Marcus Aurelius once wrote that our lives are what our thoughts make of them. I believe the same is true for our leadership. Our influence is what our words make of it. Every conversation you have is either building trust or eroding it. Every speech is either planting courage or sowing doubt. This is why a Stoic leader chooses each word as a craftsman chooses the next stroke of the chisel, carefully, purposefully knowing that one careless motion can damage the entire sculpture. You will not always have the perfect phrase. There will be moments when you stumble, when you wish you had said something differently. That is natural. What matters is not perfection, but intention. People will remember less of your exact words and more of the feeling you left them with. Did you leave them clearer than before? Did you leave them stronger? Did you leave them feeling seen? If the answer is yes, then you have led well. A leader's voice is not just heard in the grand moments of speeches and meetings. It is also in the small exchanges, the way you greet someone in passing, the way you respond to a mistake, the way you handle someone's doubt. Leadership is 1,000 quiet acts of influence that over time shape the culture and direction of a team, a family, even a nation. And just as the Stoics taught that our character is built in the daily discipline of thought and action, so too is our leadership built in the daily discipline of how we speak and listen. There will be days when you face opposition so fierce that you will be tempted to raise your voice or compromise your values. On those days, remember this: a calm voice does not signal weakness, it signals control. A voice rooted in truth does not need to shout, and a leader who has mastered themselves will never be mastered by the noise of the crowd. This is the kind of presence people remember for a lifetime. The greatest leaders in history, whether philosophers, generals, or statesmen, shared one common trait. They understood that their authority came not from the position they held, but from the trust they earned. And trust is built when your words align with your actions. When you say you will do something, you do it. When you stand for a principle, you stand for it, in both fair weather and storm. This consistency is the most persuasive language a leader can speak. So as you step forward from here, speak not just to be heard, but to be understood. Speak not just to instruct, but to inspire. Speak not just to lead, but to serve. Let your voice be a mirror of your discipline, your courage, and your compassion. The Stoics remind us that we cannot control how others receive our words, but we can control the truth, clarity, and integrity with which we speak them. And in that control lies the freedom and power of real leadership. If you have listened this far, then you are someone who does not settle for leadership by accident. You are someone who seeks to lead with wisdom, restraint, and purpose. Take a moment to think about one conversation you will have this week that could shape someone's thinking or decision. Approach it with the patience of Marcus, the precision of Seneca, and the courage of Epictetus. Then watch as the small ripples of your words begin to move mountains in the lives of those around you. If this journey has spoken to you, share it with another aspiring leader. You may never know the full extent of the impact you set in motion, but that is the beauty of true leadership. It begins with a voice, but it never ends with you.
If this message stirred something in you, don't let it fade. Write one thing down that you'll start doing this week. 2025 doesn't magically change anything you do, and your future begins the moment you decide to move, even just a little.